Why did Elijah leave his servant there, we might ask? And I mean, it's interesting that we're told that detail. So there might be a reason. There's 3 guesses I found in my study. One is so the servant wouldn't know where he was. If he didn't know, he couldn't be forced by Jezebel to tell where he was. That's somewhat a protection. So it might have been he said, I don't want her to find me, so I'm leaving you here so you can't tell her where I am. Of course, he couldn't tell her, couldn't tell her if he was with him, but anyway. The servant would be safer and better provided for there. Elijah was going into the wilderness with no food. We're going to see, has a goal of going to Mount Sinai 250 miles away on foot through the desert. So some believe that he was protecting and providing, said, you'll be better off here. And he was at the point, remember, he was praying to die, so he didn't much care if he died. But he didn't want to bring that on his servant. Or if his ministry was over, because it does sound like he's quitting. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. If his ministry is over, he doesn't need a servant. So was Elijah, by this act, walking away from being God's prophet? This is a really low time for Elijah. As we talked about last week, it's a surprise considering how high he had just been to pray down fire from heaven. So we need to notice this. Opportunity does not equal permission. Opportunity does not equal permission. I want to make this point here about Elijah. I don't believe Elijah is following God's will right now. Elijah, normally, everything he did for the last 3 years since he announced there would be a drought, there would be no rain, he has asked God for every move or heard God tell him, now go talk to Jezebel, or now go talk to Ahab, now go do this, now go do this. And then as soon as he gets this threat from Jezebel, he just runs. And there's no indication he's asking God for help. He's taking an opportunity to get away without God's permission. And I think this is very important for us to remember. Because people, even believers, even strong believers, we sometimes take any opportunity as, oh, God must want me to do that. Someone who had walked away from our church, I saw her in another setting, and I said, what happened? Oh, my friend invited me to her church, so I thought, oh, I'll just go to that church. Well, opportunity does not equal permission. I really would hope before a person makes a major move after being involved in a church to go to another church, that they at least talk to God about it and not just respond to an invitation. And there's many more things than that. Opportunity, just because an opportunity presents itself, that doesn't mean we just follow that opportunity. That's letting circumstances run our lives instead of God. Psalm 25:12 says, who is the man who fears the Lord? Him, that person, will he instruct in the way that he should choose. God doesn't leave us floundering. Remember, as we've often said since our study of James, that the one really clear thing God says, if you ask for it, I will give it, is wisdom. And so often we let circumstances guide our lives instead of asking God at all. And I think if we remember, just having opportunity doesn't mean I have God's permission. It's important. The Bible has examples illustrating opportunity without permission. Genesis 39, Joseph, he had the opportunity to sleep with his master's wife. She was begging him, grabbing him. If we don't realize that opportunity does not equal permission, well, she asked. See how it can be ridiculous. We don't notice it sometimes in other areas. 1 Samuel 24 and 26, David had 2 opportunities to kill Saul. Very clear opportunities. But God did not give him permission. His men even encouraged him. He even said, They even said, God told you you're going to be next king. All you got to do is take care of Saul right now and it's done. That's God's plan. No, he said, God didn't tell me to do it. He didn't let opportunity guide him instead of God's permission. Esther 5 through 7. Why does it take 3 verses? 3 chapters? Because Esther had opportunity 3 times to share with King Ahasuerus. No. Yes, Ahasuerus is the right king. None of you would have cared, but anyway. I couldn't remember if it was Artaxerxes or Ahasuerus. Anyway, one of those. She had 3 opportunities to say, Haman is trying to kill my people. But she was waiting for God's permission, because each opportunity she took a step that was not all the way there. She invited the king and Haman to dinner. Then they had a dinner and he said, I'll give you whatever you want to the half of my kingdom. And somehow God put in her heart, not now, not now. Opportunity did not equal permission. And what happened between that day and the next day? Mordecai was greatly honored. And because of that, when Haman's plot was revealed, the king knew who Mordecai was, who would become the man to take Haman's place in leading the nation. God's permission was more important than just taking every opportunity. Well, what if I don't get another opportunity? If it's God's opportunity, he'll make sure it's the right time. Daniel 1. Daniel and his friends, that's the plus. That's Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Daniel and his friends had the opportunity, as did the other Jewish young men in their company. These are the only 4 who stood up. There were more than 4 taken. These 4 had the opportunity to finally eat all that rich food they hadn't been able to eat all their lives. But they didn't say opportunity equals permission. They said, no, we've been taught. We know God's law. We're not to eat that, even with opportunity. Even if it's the only thing we'd have to eat, I don't think they would have eaten it. And because they withstood that and said, no, we're waiting, we're going to do what God says, not just what opportunity says, they were a testimony. And they ended up being able to do, the king allowed them to eat, or the keeper, their steward that took care of them, allowed them to eat the foods that they were allowed to eat. And they were healthier and wiser and had great opportunity, other opportunities, because they waited for God's permission. And in Acts 16:9, it's or 6, it says that they had an opportunity to preach in Asia. The door was open, but the Holy Spirit told us not to go there. And that, how can it ever not be right to share the gospel somewhere? Opportunity does not equal permission. Who is he who fears the Lord? That person who fears the Lord will instruct him in how he should choose. Let's seek the Lord and not seek circumstances. The problem with being guided by circumstances is we can interpret circumstances differently. We see in the same circumstance different reasons what it's saying. I heard about 2 young girls, teenagers, who were walking together, and one of them was looking across at this nice young man on the campus that looked good looking, and in her heart she thought, I wonder if that's who God has for me. And her friend next to her said, look at that cute guy, and she went, confirmation. With circumstances, we can make them say almost anything we want them to say, but if we seek God first, let's be sure we get his permission, his direction, his help, his guidance in what he wants us to do. Okay, we finally get to number 4. We had Elijah flees for his life was number 3. Number 4, these are all under Elijah forgets God's presence because he's not acting like God is with him. And that is Elijah prays to die. But he himself, now he left his servant, he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. They do grow on trees. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Now Elijah was wise to pray, but he didn't pray a wise prayer. This was not a wise prayer. "I've had enough, take away my life." God never answers that prayer in the affirmative. Others have asked. Here's a couple examples. Moses said when God was holding him responsible for leading his people, he said, "If you're going to treat me like this, just kill me now." But God did not answer that prayer with a yes. Jonah, you know what? You'd think this would be in the belly of the whale. "If I'm going to have to live in a whale, take me now." That isn't when he prayed this prayer. He apparently liked it in there. He stayed 3 days. When he prayed this prayer, "Take my life from me, for it is better for me to die," is after the people of Nineveh repented like he told them to, and God forgave them and decided not to destroy them. He said, "Take my life. If you're not going to kill them, kill me." That God knows better than to just be guided by our winsome prayers. Remember, God says no if we ask against his will for us. God says no. Do we think God is less wise than parents? If your child asks you for a pocket knife when they're 3, do you give it to them? Huh? A loaded gun. How will that work for you? She can't help herself. Do we expect God to be less loving than a parent, less wise? 2 Peter 3:9, when people are complaining God is taking too long to return. Back then. Wow. If you didn't, I know I say this often, but it's worth it. If you did not hear Gabe's message last night, it was called Between Advents. And it was powerful and interesting, fascinating. But he talked about how the people of Israel waited at least, as scholars believe, 4,000 years for the Messiah. 4,000 years. We're tired of waiting for Christ's return after 2. And we think they're so impatient. After 2,000 years. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. Sometimes he holds back the answer because he's patient with us. You didn't really want to pray that. I know what you're asking for, but it's not what's best for you, and I know that. All right, you have your next page. I'm going to do a little turn off on here.